Before the start of the U.S. Civil War, the seceding southern states launched a great initiative to capture as many federally owned forts as possible, hold, and occupy them. They wanted to make sure it as hard as possible for the Union to go and capture it themselves. Hi, my name is Colin on History, and today I'm going to be looking at the Battle of Santa Rosa Island just near Fort Pickens here. Pensacola, Florida was no different, as on January 12, 1861, Florida and Alabama militia would go ahead and seize the naval yard here, trying to capture ammunition and supplies from the Union. However, it was the Union that acted just a little bit faster, as Lieutenant Alexander Slemner made sure he moved supplies from Fort Pickens and McRae, and also a good bit of soldiers, to Fort Pickens to make sure that he can hold out in a very good tenable position. The months following would be tense, as Confederate soldiers just across the pond here, across Santa Rosa Island, would be looking at Union soldiers at Fort Pickens. Now, just a couple months after that January 12th event, on March 11th, Brigadier General Braxton Bragg would take command of the troops here in Pensacola and the strategic situation over here in Pensacola on the Confederate side. The Union themselves would get reinforced here at Fort Pickens, as on April 16th, 1861, Colonel Harvey Brown would take command of the fort. He would be reinforced too by some regular troops, and he would hold on to that for just a couple of months before he would have to go ahead and give over 2 companies of U.S. regular artillery troops over to Brigadier General Irwin McDowell in Washington, D.C. It was to his dismay, though luck would be slightly on his side, as he would go ahead and get reinforced by the 6th New York Infantry Regiment of Volunteers under the command of a Joe named Billy Wilson. Now, they would go ahead and arrive here on June 26, 1861, and would stay here just a mile east of Fort Pickens. Braxton Bragg, over here at Fort Pickens now, as his command was transferred there, would take a second to chastise his troops for not being ready and spotting the Union enough here in Pensacola. Braxton Bragg would spend the next few months organizing his disorganized men and planning whatever he could to try to take Fort Pickens. By October 1861, everything, however, would take a good change. The good change? Well, by early October 1861, Brigadier General Braxton Bragg heard news that Colonel Harvey Brown was planning to attack his position at Fort Pickens. Whether these claims are true or not, it motivated Bragg to go ahead and plan up something of his own. He would plan first to destroy the camp of the 6th New York Regiment of Volunteers and to spike the batteries of Cameron and Lincoln on the east side of Fort Pickens. Brigadier General Bragg would concoct his own sort of plan and would put Brigadier General Richard H. Anderson in charge of the operation, leading 1,000 volunteers to go ahead and make the destruction of the camp possible and the spiking of the batteries possible. On October 8th, 1861, at exactly 10 p.m., Brigadier General Richard H. Anderson, leading the 1,000 volunteers, would go ahead and leave the Pensacola Naval Yard and would embark to Santa Rosa Island, where he would land roughly around this location near the Camping Visitor Center. He would arrive here on October 9th, 1861 at exactly 2 a.m., ready to go ahead and launch his strike on Fort Pickens. Where I'm currently standing is close to Battery Cooper, just a few meters away here. Now, where I am kind of standing is close to Camp Brown, the site in which the 6th New York Infantry Regiment of Volunteers would make their stand of the battle. Going back to where I was originally, Richard H. Anderson would land about 4 miles east of Fort Pickens. He was about 3 miles east of Fort Brown, which is near this location. He would march his men up in 3 columns of command. Himself, Brigadier General Richard H. Anderson, commanding the west wing, Colonel Jackson, commanding the center, and Brigadier General James R. Chalmers would go ahead and command the right wing. They would all march up and converge upon the camp where they were first met by Union pickets and then were met by the entirety of the New York Infantry Regiment of Volunteers. Almost, as there was 250 total, 234 were available for combat that day. The whole affair with the battle would last just a couple hours, as the regiment found themselves under heavy fire and completely outnumbered. And after just a few hours of confrontation, they would have to go ahead and retreat into Batteries Taunton, which is just north of where I'm standing right now, and into Fort Pickens itself, which is even more north of where I'm standing right now. Join me on the next part where I go ahead and talk about the situation after they retreat into Fort Pickens and the eventual counterattack that Colonel Harvey Brown would lead. With the shattered remnants of the 6 New York Infantry Volunteers retreating back into Fort Pickens, it seemed like it was not going all for the Union. However, it would turn around as when Colonel Harvey Brown saw the fires set on the New York Regiment's campsite, he would go ahead and launch a counterattack, or I guess you could say a relief force of 600 men led under Major Arnold Lewis, and they would go ahead and attack and try to save what was left of the New York Regiment of Volunteers. However, the Confederates, seeing that daybreak was coming and that their overall leading commander, Major General Braxton Bragg, had fired a shot from Fort Pickens signaling that it was time to leave, they decided to leave. Brigadier General Richard H. Anderson decided to go ahead and pull back all his men to the original landing site. It was there, however, where he would go ahead and experience the full fire of the counterattack. As he was leaving, Major Israel Volage, the leading forward column of the U.S. troops, would go ahead and attack a portion of Richard H. Anderson's men and would hit Richard H. Anderson himself, him getting shot in the shoulder. It was a runaway scrape. I guess you can call this battle kind of a seesaw affair, as it starts on the Confederates' hand and ends with the Union's. At the end of the whole affair, the Confederates would take 18 killed, 39 wounded, and 30 captured. The Union would not fare off too much better, as they suffered 14 killed, 29 wounded, and 24 captured. And Major Israel Vages himself would be part of that capture. He would later get paroled in May of 1862. This battle, really though a small affair and not considered a battle in its entirety, does show that even here in 1861, when battles like Belmont, First Manassas, Wilson's Creek were being fought, something was going on down here in the panhandle of Florida. Thank you guys for watching. If you like what you see, subscribe. I post a lot of historical content and just overall vlogging. Hope you see you guys soon, and bye-bye.